So we're going to connect the dots from the ancient past to the present to figure out why the world is so bloody screwed up today, and why most of us, and especially the young people today, find this world utterly, completely incomprehensible. They do not resonate with anything, what's going on. Most of us are confused about what's going on in politics. We don't understand why things are just getting worse and worse and worse when the answers should be so bloody simple. And yet things are just getting more and more complicated. So clearly whatever is going on is going in the wrong direction. And that's why we have things like nostalgia, where we keep reminiscing about the good old days. Isn't that just that alone is a reminder that things used to be better in the past, because they're certainly not getting better into the future. So the concept of nostalgia is a reminder that we should wake up and do something about this future that we're hurtling towards. It's not looking pretty at this stage. But the good news is that there is a shining light at the end of this tunnel, which will end on the very high note tonight. So if you feel at any stage that this information is really dark and depressing, because it can get dark and depressing, I want to remind you that that's just the foundation for the information of what we can do as a species to get ourselves out of this mess. And I like to always work with the positive in mind, because if we don't, then there really is no purpose to this life as I see it today personally. So why does it matter that we connect the dots from the past? Because if we don't know who we are and where we come from, how could we possibly know where we are going? That's actually a quote from Jurassic Park, believe it or not. So what I'd like to ask you tonight is to keep an open mind at all times, because the information, the further I go down this rabbit hole, the more disturbing it becomes. And I'm sure many of you are aware of this already. And there is no bottom to the rabbit hole. It just gets weirder and weirder and weirder. And some of the information I'm going to share with you tonight is getting to that point where I don't know if I can actually talk about some things in public at this stage. Some things I have to edit myself, because if I talk about some things in public, which I've tried, I come under incredible attacks. And I don't want to alienate any people. My whole purpose is to unite people, not to divide people anymore. We bloody divided enough. So let's share information that actually is going to act as a platform to unify people and give us a direction forward instead of create more division. So some level of editing is necessary from time to time to keep that unifying factor going. So let's kick this off. The world is covered in countless, unimaginable numbers of ancient, megalithic, ancient sites built by civilizations and people that we know nothing about. Every year, every month, every week, new sites are being discovered. And I know that Hugh Newman, for example, is one of those people that keeps discovering new, incredible sites. Some of the things he shared with me over the last few days just blew my mind. So we have no idea of what happened on this planet. We just literally are like babies waking up from a deep sleep, trying to figure out who we are, where we come from, and why we're here, while there's this unwritten, unknown history of our planet that probably goes back a lot further and is a lot more weird and strange and unimaginable that most of us could possibly fathom. And it's these strange structures like this that were built by some people in ancient times. And when they were finished building this one, they decided to go from South America to just up the road here and build one of these. They said, let's drag a bunch of rocks from Wales and put them up in a circle. And somebody said, well, why should we do that? Because it's cool. And they did that. So they dragged a bunch of rocks, put them in a circle, and it looked cool, and they moved on. And they went into the desert and they built a big statue because they didn't have any statues. And the reason I realized just recently why they could do all this stuff in ancient times, very simple reason. Because they did not have jobs. They didn't have jobs to go to every day. They had all this time on their hands to do stuff with. Say, what shall we do today? Hey, let's go and build some of these pyramidal kind of things right next to this big statue in the desert. So they went and they built big pyramidal stuff, and they went out somewhere out near Israel and then built these big platforms with giant rocks, and they went up the mountain in South America, and they built more rocks that fitted into each other, and they thought, wow, it'll freak out people in the future. And they went and built, carved big statues and put them under a roof of solid stone and rock, and because they needed statues and they needed some place to go and worship and offer food to these statues. And then they went up the mountain and they built wall faces with faces sticking out them. And why did they do that? Because it's going to freak people out. And they did that because they had all this time. And then they had a board meeting under a tree, like people in ancient times did, like they still do in Africa, because they didn't have jobs. They had just this time, and they had a board meeting under a tree. And one of the guys said, look, what we've never done yet is dig a hole and surround the hole with giant stones. So they said, well, let's do that. So they did that. Why should we do it? Because we can. So they did that. And then one said, wow, that's amazing, huh? I said, what did I just hear you say? Did you say, huh? I said, wow, I think that is a really cool letter for an alphabet. We don't have an alphabet yet, but I think let's start with her as a first letter of the alphabet. So they went up the mountain and they carved a whole lot of hers, and they left them behind to confuse us. And then one of them said, you know what we've never done? We've never carved a whole city out of solid rock. So they went up the mountain and carved a whole city out of solid rock. Then they said, we need more pillars on top of a platform. So they built more pillars on a platform. Somebody said, we need more stairs with pillars. So they built more stairs with pillars. And then what is clearly evidential is that these people could hold their breath for a long, long time, because then they went under the water, under the oceans, and they did this only because they could hold their breath. Otherwise, they could never do this. Then they went into the jungles and they built these kind of things. They're really scary. And they built more statues and chopped their heads off because that was freaky. And then another guy said, what we've never done is taken a big rock and hollow the rock out. So they went and they hollowed a bunch of rocks out, and they scattered them throughout Siberia, and then they went back into the desert and they carved out big blocks and put them on top of each other like Lego blocks, and they covered it with sand because they thought it would be fun, just cover it with sand. And then they built this big thing that when you look at it from the top, it vibrates. It looks like it's moving and vibrating. And then they put these bell-like things on top of it to do something, and we don't quite know what it was. And the amazing thing is that they did all this stuff with hammers, chisels, ropes, and pulleys. And this is what our historians are still trying to convince us of today. That is the most remarkable and unbelievable thing. Even the next most unbelievable thing is that pretty much everything I shared with you here so far, all of these structures are either in the northern hemisphere or along the equator. Very little has ever happened in the southern hemisphere. And that's a big problem, until you discover the vanished civilizations of southern Africa. Because if southern Africa is supposed to be this cradle of humankind that we keep being told about, there must be stuff that happened there in ancient times. And that's exactly what it is. The vanished civilizations of southern Africa is a big, big deal. I've only recently started to realize what a big deal it is, because until I started talking about this and showing this on the large scale in the numbers that we find these ancient ruins in southern Africa, there was very little knowledge or information written or available about that. So welcome to my part of the world and my life, to the stone circles and the vanished civilizations of southern Africa that left behind more than 10 million circular stone ruins that are absolutely spectacular only when you start looking at them from the air. Each one is completely unique, and some of them are very large, some of them are small, some of them look insignificant, some of them look like beautiful flowers. And you'll notice that they're all connected to each other by these channels. They do not stand alone. You'll notice that they have extended structures that are covered by soil that move away from the stone circles as we see them sticking out of the ground today. And it just goes on and on. What you're looking at is the largest cluster of stone ruins found anywhere in the world today. It makes everything else pale into insignificance. Sometimes they run for 100 by 100 kilometers. Connected, all stone circles that are not standalone. They're all connected by channels and this weird spider's web effect that holds all of these circles and the channels together. and you just see the devastation and the destruction from some event that destroyed all of this a long, long time ago. And then a few of them have been rebuilt and restructured in more recent times. The key thing here is that there are no doors and entrances. So these cannot be dwellings for people or cows or other animals, because clearly they were not built with doors and entrances. They're something else. Archaeological drawings from 1939 clearly indicate that they have no doors and entrances, that they're circular structures all connected to each other by these channels looking like a bunch of grapes here in this image. And sometimes these circles are concentric, connected to each other, all linking to each other. And that is all seated in a large network of agricultural terraces that cover at least 450,000 square kilometers in South Africa and Zimbabwe. Who built these terraces? What were they for? What were they growing? And who were they feeding? In the most recent research that I've found from Anton Parks, if you've not come across Anton Parks yet, I highly recommend that you get his books. They're now available in English. It is a whole new spin and a whole new level on Anunnaki activity. And not just Anunnaki, but many other ancient beings that were not necessarily as benevolent as the Anunnaki. A whole new look at the Sumerian language as a prototype language to pretty much every language in the world today. And in there he suggests that whatever was happening in Southern Africa, they were growing huge amounts of food that were from there, they were feeding all the other groups of beings around the world from one central food growing area. And I'm suspecting that this is why there are so many agricultural terraces, because they were feeding the beings, whether they were Anunnaki or other beings from around the world, from Southern Africa. And these terraces cover entire mountains. Once you start walking around, people that have been on my Stone Circle research journeys with me now, we've just had the second one, you realize the extent of this. It literally makes your jaw just drop down with wonder and amazement how vast this is. The flagship among all these ruins in Southern Africa unquestionably has become known as Adam's Calendar. This site was rediscovered by Johann Heine in 2003, 2004. It is now, as far as I know, the oldest example, or an example of the oldest working sun calendar. It still works. As you can see, the shadow of the rock closest to us casts a shadow on the calendar stone, and it moves from the left to the right, from the summer solstice to the winter solstice, and when it reaches the right edge of that calendar stone, it comes back. So you can still tell every day of the year based on the setting of that sun and the shadow, where the shadow lands. Credo Mutwa's famous Zulu shaman started to weep when I showed him the book Adam's Calendar in 2008. He said he never thought he'd see that special place again, because he was initiated there in 1937. He then proceeded to tell me what a sacred and important place it was in all of human history, and he said it was known as Inzalo Yilanga, or birthplace of the sun, in Zulu shamanic tradition, where humanity was created by the gods to be the slaves in the gold mines. So this is information that's well recorded, knowledge handed down for thousands of years among African shamans, as always completely ignored by mainstream academia and historians. This is the aerial photograph of Adam's Calendar, or Inzalo Yilanga, right on the edge of the cliff there. It drops down about 300 meters there and then goes into the Barberton Valley, which is an entire kilometer below this mountaintop. There's a 3D reconstruction of Adam's Calendar where we have a Horus stone. We have 3 stones, the Orion stones that line up with the rise of Orion. North is on the left, south is on the right. And here we have another stone over here that was removed in 1992 and put somewhere else with a plaque on it to commemorate the opening of the Blue Swallow Nature Reserve. Now, if you go from the southern stone on the right between the 2 calendar stones, as you can see there, those are the calendar stones. I think I have a pointer here, actually. Yes, just to use technology. There. That's the south-north line. That is south. That is north, and it goes right between the 2 calendar stones. If you continue north to your left, you get to Great Zimbabwe, and if you carry on further north another 7,000 kilometers, you get to the Great Pyramid of Giza, all perfectly aligned on the 31 degrees east longitudinal line, otherwise known as the Nilotic Meridian. That is also where Linda Tucker has her white lions, the sacred white lions at Timbavati, also sits on the Nilotic Meridian. And then we get to the strange and mysterious tools, stone tools and artifacts that I started collecting. For some reason, when I first arrived there in this place from Johannesburg 11 years ago now, I don't know why I was attracted to certain things, because they didn't make any sense geologically or archaeologically, but I started collecting these weird stones, and thank God for that, because right now those are turning out to be the most valuable and crucial pieces of evidence for this vanished civilization and what was going on there. You can see how happy I was when I picked up that one. And then we have what I call these the bird-shaped stones. Here's another bird-shaped stone. It looks like it was carved, and then the patina has grown over it, and then the weird cone-shaped tools that I started collecting. Just strange cone-shaped tools everywhere, scattered across the mountains. Not to forget the donut stones or the Taurus stones, and there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of these donut Taurus-shaped stones scattered throughout southern Africa. And that brings us to the stones that ring like bells, these weird elongated stones that look like French loaves, that when you tap them, they ring so spectacularly, so beautifully, you would not believe it's a stone, it's a bell. The one at the top here, for example, that clearly looks like it was carved or shaped by somebody. That doesn't look like a normal stone, and neither does the one at the bottom, and they both ring at the same frequency. That is the key thing here. When you ring them, and they ring like bells. In fact, that one at the top was the very first tool that I've ever collected. But nothing could have prepared me for the discovery of January 2018, when my first Stone Circle research team accidentally discovered the mud fossils of giants and other creatures. And it was like cognitive dissonance have just suddenly vanished. So once I was blind, now I could see. It's incredible. And we were walking up the mountain with this team. This was in January, and this stone here, that stone there, was lying right beneath my feet. So I picked it up, and once again I just shook my head and I went, why are these stones these weird shapes? What's going on with all these weird shapes, man? And I put the stone down on the wall, one of the walls, and I walked up the mountain, and I said, by the time I come down, I'm going to figure out what this is. And I did. As I was coming down, I suddenly started remembering all the stuff I was seeing in my research into mud fossils. And when I looked at that stone again, I picked it up, I went, oh my goodness, this is a rib. And everything changed. And there you can see a collection of many of the fossils. Here we have a shoulder blade. We got one rib here. There's another beautiful elongated rib. And there are just all kinds of body parts that completely and utterly metamorphosize. Now, here is one of the best examples. There's a heart. You can clearly see the aorta, where the aorta goes at the top. You see the coronary artery crossing the heart. This is about 3 times the size of a human heart. So this could possibly fit the shape of an Anunnaki. If the Anunnaki were 3 times the size or twice the size of humans, that could be an Anunnaki heart. Completely fossilized, metamorphosized into Hornfels rock. This is a huge problem for geology and metallurgy and chemistry. It seems that when these body parts get trapped in mud and water, they completely and utterly transmutate and transform from whatever organ it was or body part with the internal structure. It completely metamorphosizes into very dense crystalline rock called hornfels in geological terms. When these fossils break and you look at the internal structure, you can't see internal structure. This is the mystery. Only when you look carefully, you start seeing some indications of weird things going on. And you'll see what I mean in a second. But just to the untrained eye, when any of these fossils break, it just looks like black rock, known as hornfels or ringstone. We have teeth, hearts, ribs, and I'm picking up more and more hearts. different shapes and sizes of hearts. In fact, some of them look like they still have organic material in it. By the way, we have identified a few of these fossils and taken them away to the lab to extract DNA. Yes, you can extract DNA from mud fossils. That is not something new. It has been done before. So I wait with great anticipation for us to extract DNA from some of these fossils, because that's going to be a whole nother step. And one of the things that happened, I was holding that heart in my hand like I was here in this picture. Literally, it was taken on the same day. I was standing with his heart in my hand, and this couple pulled up, a guy and his wife, and he ran up and he said, "Hey, Michael, how's it going? I've been watching your videos." And he looked at me and said, "Is that a heart you're holding?" And I go, "Yeah, well, I think it's a heart." He goes, "Well, it is a heart. I'm a surgeon. That's a bloody heart." And I go, "Wow, you're a surgeon?" "Yeah, I'm a surgeon at the Johannesburg Gen." So I said, "Wow, hey, would you mind just going on video and telling me a bit about some of these body parts?" So I've got about a 5-minute video or more, about a 10-minute video clip of him going around telling me what these different body parts are. So it was a really beautifully timed moment. And since then, there have been many doctors and physicians and people that understand human anatomy, and their jaws literally fall to the ground when they see what fills the museum. That is where the shoulder blade was lying. I've been driving past this for 10 years. 10 years. Didn't see it. That's that expression. Once I was blind, but now I can see. Everything changes. Here's a bone knuckle, a large bone knuckle. The shaft going to the left, and you can see with my feet next to it, the size of that. I mean, and this is like a foot in a shoe or something. It's like some sort of a foot in a leather shoe. I was joking about this. Emma and I were up the mountain. We were joking. Look, this looks just like a foot. This is 6 months before we realized that we're actually dealing with mud fossils. Suddenly everything changes. Now we go, okay, well, what's going on here? Here we've got bones. You can clearly see that that's a bone up there. That's not a rock, a fossilized bone. And all these others. This is a bone with muscle attached to it. So that's what these rocks look like. That's when the whole muscle and tissue together fossilize. That's what happens. They create these beautiful rounded structures. Here you got pieces of a spine. There's that rib that I picked up. More ribs. The fascinating thing about this rib here, that seems to be the one right at the top, except like 3 or 4 times the size of a human rib. When you look at it from the edge, it looks like someone cut it with a knife. It was like somebody was having a spare rib feast. It's ridiculous. Here's a part of a jawbone, this piece that goes up right under your ear here, except that's like 20 times the size of a human. Not sure what this is, what part of the body that is. This is another look at that bone and a claw. This is a claw from some creature. I have no idea, but we're now picking up more and more claws and hooves of creatures. This is a hoof of some creature. This is where the bone would have come in from the top. You can see it's got cutting marks, as if somebody actually cut the bone. There's like the talon on the side here. You can see where the talon broke off, or what's that thing? The talon? Was it called a talon? A claw? The claw or the talon on the chicken foot is another angle. From the top, you can see the saw marks. Somebody was sawing that bone off. And the phalluses. Here's a giant phallus. This is just insane. This was taken out near Adam's calendar. And then this is just a collection, a shot of a bunch of skin, sort of reptilian skin with the meat attached to it. This is a close-up of the reptilian skin on one of them. And this is my favorite one, where you can actually see the skin at the top and how the epithelial cells are growing up into the skin before they actually reach the top. This entire thing is one piece of Hornfels rock, completely and utterly metamorphosized. You cannot distinguish internal organs in any possible way. That is a huge cognitive dissonance problem we're going to have to come across, because we don't understand how that works. I don't know what the hell this is, but I find it fascinating. Again, you can see the skin, the reptilian skin, and whatever this was inside here that completely turned to rock. This is one of my favorite pieces. Again, the skin there, and then these claw marks or teeth marks. Somebody was having a little steak when a giant wall of mud came and engulfed them all and turned them into mud fossils. And then recently, on the last Stone Circle expedition, I've been walking past this rock and many rocks like this lying up on top of the mountain, and you just think they're rocks. Well, you'd be wrong. All of them are pretty much fossils. We noticed this strange thing in there, this weird, like a whatever that is, whatever you call it, a pattern in there. And we photographed it and we started playing with it, the exposure. We realized it's a tail, you see. It's a lizard or a crocodile tail with a hind leg, one hind leg there, another hind leg down here. When you look at the other, there's another view of it. There's a crocodile or lizard leg, tail going back there. There's the one leg. This entire thing is one giant rock. So, the mud fossils of giants and weird creatures have suddenly taken the spotlight off the stone circles and the vanished civilizations because they seem to be everywhere. And we now have to put this into context of what we're dealing with here. We've got this vast civilization with all these terraces everywhere, growing huge amounts of food, millions of stone circles, and now this on top of it? What the hell is going on? And that brings us to the whole biblical story. When the gods were on earth, there were giants. And Hugh Newman knows all about this because of his new book about giants on record. We've all seen this. Many of us would have seen this image on the internet of real, actual historic finds of giants or pieces of giants or fragments. So these are real. And yet this is nothing compared to what we're finding. In the Jewish Encyclopedia, we get told about the rabbinical tradition, about the Anakim that are of the same titanic races as the Rephaim, the Nephilim, the Gibborim, the Zamzumim, and the Emim. They talk about them like they were the Russians, the Jews, the Russians, the Polish, the Portuguese, and the Italians, right? And like they knew who they were. Well, we have no idea who they were. The Zamzumim and the Emim, wow. In South Africa, we have the Boskop skull that's about 20% larger than the human skull. And then we have this bone fragment that's actually crystallized already at the Wits Museum, Wits University in Johannesburg. That's where I graduated from, by the way, in 1983. And there's the size. It's about at least twice this. Oops. Sorry. It's at least twice the size of a human leg bone, a human joint there. Look at that compared to that. When you see it in real life, it's a lot more impressive. And then you start seeing footprints like this that has become far more interesting, but nothing like the giant footprint close to my house, about 2 hours drive from where I live, and this is probably about 7 times as large as a human. It's interesting that Klaus Donner actually found the nose bone, the heel bone, and a skull fragment in Ecuador of a giant that was about 10 meters tall, or between 7 and 10 meters tall. And what is even more interesting, that the skeleton of that giant in Ecuador is actually in the Ecuador Museum. It's on display for everyone to see. And then there's still people that talk about, oh, giants are just a myth, they don't really exist. And there are these giant skeletons for us to see all over the world. But these were the small guys. Once we start looking at the books of Leviticus and the book of Enoch, everything changes. Because in Leviticus, they tell us, or whoever the narrator is tells us, that we were like locusts by their side. That's how small we were compared to the giants that lived in that part of the world. And the book of Enoch, I've heard about the book of Enoch so much and about the giants, so I looked it up just before I left. And I found it, I think it was on page 69 or 89, I can't remember now, where it clearly talks about the giants that were 3,000 ells tall. So I looked up what an ell is, and an ell is just short of half a meter. So 3,000 ells would make these giants 1.5 kilometers tall, or just short of a mile. Now this is a whole nother scale. And we have to start cognitively and consciously thinking about the possibility and probability and reality of these beings that existed on our planet at some time in the past. Stop shoving it aside and ignoring it, because history and oral tradition keeps talking about it. And even now in the stone circles, you can't get away from it. Suddenly it's all about the bloody giants. You know, I didn't want to talk about the giants, but I'm forced to talk about the giants. You know, I want to talk about stone circles. And we're picking up pieces of bloody giants everywhere. You know, these are not stones. These are fossils, people. Stones don't make these weird shapes. Body parts, anatomy makes these weird shapes, and not just of humans, of weird creatures that we have no idea what they look like. We don't know how many hearts they had. We don't know if they had blood. We don't know if they were cold-blooded or hot-blooded, if they had exoskeletons or inner skeletons. We're just speculating. We're just finding these parts, trying to figure out what the hell is going on. Just to remind you again of that knuckle, which is quite large, but nothing compared to this one. Look at this. I mean, this is the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. That's where the shaft came out and was cut off. Would have gone out to the right here. And in fact, from this angle, I've just noticed, I think yesterday when I was editing this, when you look at this angle, it looks like it's got that reptilian skin there on top as well. Stuff gets weirder and weirder. And this is just a close-up of where the shaft was cut off. You can see that the metamorphosized rock there is completely different because of the bone marrow and the blood and whatever was in that part of the bone when it was cut off. Whoever cut that off or broke it off or severed it off somehow. And then obviously we have the heart, the aorta. And if you think this is an interesting aorta and a heart, there you can see it going in there. And there's a coronary artery going down. Very clear. If there are any physicians here, you'll know what I mean. It's very obvious. How about this size for a heart? There's where the aorta goes in. That's probably about a, I don't know, 50, 80, 100-ton heart. I have no idea. The fascinating thing, here's a close-up of the aorta, where that aorta, I suspect, would have gone in. And this is propped up right beneath a giant footprint. Like, here it is. It's propped up. It's not accidentally lying there. It's propped up with stones holding it up. So somebody put it there to draw our attention to the giant footprint. And through some shamanic downloads and shamanic channeling, we've been told that the Anunnaki put this heart there to point to the giant footprint. And they also tell us that they were mining the remains of the giants for the gold in the remains of the bones of the giants. That has now got to do with monoatomic gold in our blood, monoatomic gold in our bodies, and when we die, that monoatomic gold becomes diatomic gold and it sinks to the bottom. So when these giants, and so even when we die, there's gold in our bodies, in our remains, but not much. But in these giants, there would have been quite a lot of gold, and it's all in a concentrated place, so it seems like they went and got the gold from these giants. It gets weirder and weirder. But the ruins weren't dwellings or houses, so what were the ruins for? We know from cymatic patterns what shapes of sound look like, and I think it's very obvious by now what the ruins were for. For those of you that have not seen this yet, to remind you what sound manifests, how sound manifests physical form. Every sound frequency has its very own specific shape. What you're looking at here is just a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional effect. So this is actually happening in 3D, moving away, creating these beautiful shapes and patterns. Prime resonance frequency, that's what it's all about. Every frequency has a very specific shape or cymatic pattern. And as you can see, the higher the frequency, the more complex the shape. The lower the frequency, the larger the shape. I'm always amazed how many people have not yet seen this. You know, I assume by now that everybody must know this, but there are always a large number of people that have never seen this. And just keeps going up and up and up. And just because you can't hear the frequency anymore doesn't mean it's going to stop. It keeps going above and below. And you'll see below in in a little while how low it can actually go, how low we have detected cymatic patterns. Always beautiful. So, what the stone circles are just cymatic patterns representing the shape of the sound coming out of the ground at that specific place. That's it. So what these ancients knew, or the Anunnaki knew at this stage, I believe the Anunnaki were the ones that built all these, is they knew how to identify the shape of the sound frequency coming out at that specific place, and they placed the rocks on the shape of the cymatic pattern of the sound, in which case they basically amplified those sound frequencies. So they created an amplification structure. So cymatic patterns, that's why each stone circle is completely unique, none are ever the same, and this is why we started measuring very powerful frequencies in the gigahertz, sound frequencies coming out of the walls, and electromagnetic fields coming out of the walls, from 400 megahertz all the way up to 1800 megahertz at Adam's calendar. It is quite spectacular. Adam's calendar is a mystery, because the stone circles we can figure out, and we can understand how they amplify the sound frequencies because of the stones and the walls and the quartz. So it's the quartz in the rocks, in the stones, in the walls that do the vibration and the amplification. And the sound moves, and the moving sound then creates magnetic fields, and the moving magnetic fields create the electromagnetic fields. So, but Adam's calendar has got no walls. And yet it is infinitely more powerful than any of the stone circles. So something else is going on there. There's another mechanism at work there. And there we measured way beyond 375 gigahertz. The guy who was measuring it said he couldn't measure it any higher, but it indicates that it goes a lot higher than that. And then 1700 megahertz electromagnetic field running horizontally, and another one running vertically out of it. So we definitely have the indication of a toroidal field there. A toroidal vortex field that's being generated at Adam's calendar itself. And we have these weird flower-shaped ruins that actually are magnetrons, giant magnetrons built out of quartz. And I asked two magnetron scientists, how much energy would a magnetron 40 or 50 meters in diameter generate built out of pure quartz? And the answer was more than all the power plants on Earth today. So, whether that's accurate or not, I don't know. The point is, we have thousands of these magnetron-type structures built out of quartz, all connected to each other into that giant grid, creating this huge energy grid of stone circles, magnetrons, generating insane amounts of energy, pulling it together and doing something. And that's the question. What were they using all that energy for? It couldn't have just been gold mining. I guess some of it was used for gold mining, but I'm now starting to think that they were possibly manipulating the weather, geoengineering, creating a climate, creating oxygen, putting more oxygen into the atmosphere, something like that, because this is such a gigantic initiative, such a gigantic scale infrastructure that they created. It had to be something to do, it had to have something to do with much more than just mining gold. And you'll see as we go into the magnetics and understanding magnetism and how these are connected to magnetic fields, how that could have also been used to possibly create oxygen out of sucking up water from the rivers, because many of the channels from the stone circles actually run and they end up in the river. They just run and end in the river. And this has puzzled me for years and years. But now I'm starting to figure out different aspects of this. In your mind, the more information you get, obviously, the more the different your conclusions are that you reach. So the stone circles are not the only ancient energy generating devices. It seems that to me that most ancient sites are actually energy generating devices, and we need to remind ourselves that they're made of stones, and especially the stone circles are made of stones that ring like bells, and these stones have high crystal content, and crystal content means quartz, quartzite, crystal, silica. This is all materials that conduct sound and conduct light. This is all the stuff that we use in the most advanced silicon-based technology today. And we also need to remind ourselves that digital data can be stored in crystals, in quartz crystals. But obviously that's not being used in the technology world today, because otherwise they just give the game away. Once we can start storing digital data in our crystals, then the whole, you don't have to go and buy the crappy storage devices anymore. Because you get one crystal and thank you for life. It's virtually infinite amount of information in there. So what we need to start doing is looking at stones as living, conscious entities, organisms. They store knowledge and information. They conduct sound and light. They have essence and consciousness imbued in them. Rocks are not just inanimate objects, and this is why ancient cultures and these guys in the ancient times used stone in its original form. They didn't have to extract the active ingredient to put it into a crappy little flashy box to sell it to somebody, because they didn't have money. They didn't do this as commercial entity or commercial enterprise. They were doing this to help themselves on a planet they were trying to make habitable for themselves. So they used rock in its original shape and for everything they needed to use it for. So all these ancient structures built from rock are just giant machines, and using the quartz and the crystal and the silica inside the way that it should be used, as resonators, energy generating devices, using light and sound to activate it. And this is why most of these seem to be aligned to the solstices, equinoxes, movement of the sun, and often movement of the stars. So when the sun comes up over there and the rays of this rising sun comes down a passage and hits a standing stone down a passage, the light and the sound of the frequency of that light hits the standing stone. It's like hitting enter on a computer. It activates the machine to start doing whatever that machine was constructed to do. And then the sun moves, and on another solstice over there, it comes down a different passage and and the first morning light hits another standing stone, and that machine gets instructions to stop doing what it was doing and do something else. And possibly that's what happens with the movement of the stars as well. When they go down these weird shafts and etc., they activate the light and the sound frequencies of that light, of the starlight and the sunlight and possibly the moonlight, are the activators to switch on these ancient machines. So they built them without having to have human or intelligent intervention, just operated by the movement of the sun, the moon, or the stars. And we know that they're active because photographs like this tell us that they're still active. Obviously, we know this from the stone circles in South Africa. We've measured many of them. The sound frequencies are insane. Even Stonehenge, the beautiful concentric properties that have been measured in Stonehenge show us that it's strong acoustic properties that were created by intent, not by accident. And I believe, just like everything else, Stonehenge was a very powerful energy generating device, a huge, powerful resonator, and much, much older than we can imagine. I was there with Hugh yesterday, and just to confirm what I saw in 2010 when I was there for the first time, and my jaw nearly dropped when I saw the big tall stone that fell over. The two tall stones, one of them fell over and broke, and I was told over and over again, yes, that stone fell and broke. And I pointed out to the people, look, if that stone fell over and broke and is only a few thousand years old, then that break should be a reasonably clean break, a sharp edge. Well, that's not the case. That break on that stone has erosion that's about half a meter, about, a foot this way and a foot that way. Erosion, I'm sorry, but sarsen stone, a dolerite stone of that hardness, will not erode half a meter in a few thousand years. So either they're lying to us about those stones and that stone did not fall and break, or if it is that stone that fell and broke, that Stonehenge is more than 1 million years old. It's just a very old, mysterious place. The geology is not going to lie to us. Our historians will, our geologists will, our archaeologists will lie to us. But the geology is not lying to us. The erosion is there. You can't wish it away. So think about Stonehenge in a very different light. Next time you go there, check out the erosion on that stone. The ancient sites are just basically advanced technology on a gigantic scale. And we've never been able to see it because most of us don't really get images, or we don't see these ancient sites from the air, like the stone circles. When you stand next to it and you walk in these temples in Egypt, it's so overwhelming and so mesmerizing that we don't really see the wood for the trees. But when you start looking at it from the air, everything changes. And when I was there again in 2012, I realized that these obelisks are just like antennae. They ring like bells, like the stones in my museum I've been collecting. They're beautiful. They ring so perfectly. And when you look at these temples in Egypt, they're just too many pillars, not enough space. It's obviously not meant to come and kiss butt of some king or some god and offer food and come there for forgiveness and all. It's just, it's the wrong shape, the wrong size, too many pillars. Why? And when you start looking at it from the air, you realize what it's all about. It's not about worshiping and offering food and that. And you start seeing what's going on. Resonating, vibrating pillars on beautiful platforms, acoustic chambers, and very quickly you realize that these are just templates for gigantic circuit boards, gigantic energy circuit boards on a scale that we could not have imagined. And because they did this in times where money did not restrict what they were trying to achieve. They did what they had to do to either inhabit a planet or survive or create a result that they were looking for. Microprocessors become giant macro processors. And this is one of my favorite images. You can just imagine what historians are telling us about the kind of worshipping that used to go in these places here. Oh yeah, no, those are major places of worship. Really? Yeah. And the pyramid is just a beautiful example of the same thing. It just carries on. And Angkor Wat, I mean, there you got the combination of quartz and water, the two most abundant elements on earth, that both contain memory, conduct light and sound. Saksai Huaman is another great example of just a circuit board on top of a mountain. This is not a mountaintop fortress, clearly built for other reasons, that was possibly inhabited in more recent times and used by more recent civilizations, just like the stone circles. That some of the most recent civilizations used it. They created doors and entrances in so they could use it for themselves and for their cows or whatever, but not the original architects. That's not what it was built for. Borobudur, Indonesia, I mean, this is just ridiculous. Literally, if you see photographs from right above, it looks like it's alive. It's actually, the photograph looks like it moves when you look at it. And then obviously on top of it, it's a dead giveaway. These giant bells with these antennae going up into the sky, and it's always antenna going up into the sky. And it seems that it was human sound that actually held up this weird energy grid that was used to activate these circuit boards. Human sound, because you see these perfectly acoustic amphitheaters that are always connected to many of these circuit boards. The Parthenon in Egypt is also an old circuit board. There's your giant thing there, the resonating chamber there, and the rest of the circuit board has already been completely destroyed, and it's connected to the amphitheater here, and there's another smaller amphitheater there, and the amphitheaters are always connected to the circuit board. To activate it, you fill that with a bunch of people, you scare them, you get them excited, you make them make a noise, clap their hands, or sing, or fill them with fear, and that energy gets shoved into the circuit board. It activates the circuit board to whatever it's supposed to do. And we got some interesting stuff going on. Here's another example. There's your circuit board connected with a beautiful row of ringing pillars connected to the circuit board here, the amphitheater there. This is a very badly destroyed circuit board, as you can see. And there's another one, old remains of the circuit board up top, at the top of the mountain. There's your amphitheater there that was connected to it. And there's another one here in North Africa, in Algeria. Here they put the circuit board, they put the amphitheater right into the heart of the circuit board. It's really badly destroyed. And so it goes. And nothing has changed in 2018. Temples have just become churches, towers, steeples. Who came up with this idea of this giant cone sticking up into the sky? Who was the architect that came up with this? Why do churches and places of worship have to have this architecture? It's because people create sound and energy. You understand how important the sound and energy is, and how these cones at the top of our churches and mosques actually send that sound and convert that sound into a different kind of sound as it sends it up into the sky. And so we start talking about the cone-shaped effects. Our sound is being harvested by cone-shaped roofs. And the business centers in our cities are nothing less than just giant things, resonators up into the sky, resonating the energy of the people and the noise and the phones and the anxiety and the fear. And our city grids are just like giant circuit boards, all connected by channels of energy, just like the stone circles connected by channels of energy that never stop making a noise. We never stop making a noise. Have you ever been out into the country where it's really quiet and you get back into a city? How noisy the cities are? It's insane, actually. It's quite nauseating. And that's when I realized that in the Matrix, when Morpheus holds up the battery and he says, we are the energy. And when I first saw The Matrix, I had no idea what he was talking about. I now have a much better idea what Morpheus was saying. What we energy for at this stage is open to interpretation. But what I do know, more than anything I've ever held dear, is that everything we've been taught is a lie. When I first came across this statement some 30 years ago, I thought, what an arrogant prick. Who wrote that? Really? How can you say that? I'm a smart guy. I got a degree. I came out of university. I know what they taught me. I know a lot of stuff. And I was just blind. I was still sucking up all that stuff. Now, I have a pretty clear idea of everything I was told is just deception and confusion, brainwashing. And it seems to me that the bigger the lie, the more we believe it. And that is something that I would like you to really contemplate. Because we're now going to start talking about some lies that some people have a problem with. And it's small lies that we can get over the small lies. Oh yeah, of course they do this, of course. Oh no, but this is too big. Oh, too many people are going to have to be in on it. And that's what we constantly try and overcome the big lies by believing that it's impossible for them to pull the wool over our eyes, because millions of people would figure this out. Well, they're not figuring it out, and if they are figuring it out, they're just called conspiracy theorists. So in all these areas, these are the areas that the lies have become so large that it really takes a lot of guts to start admitting it to ourselves. Because until we admit this to ourselves, we remain slaves of those that create these lies and weave these spells and keep us enslaved on every possible level. Spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, financially, consciously, socially. We're enslaved in every possible way. Michael Ledwith was an advisor to the popes for 17 years at the Vatican, and he uncovered one of the biggest lies. And I still cannot get over the fact that no other biblical scholar that I've come across has exposed this lie or this oversight. And they all should know this, because Michael discovered that the opening phrase of the Bible does not say, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." That is a lie. The Hebrew Bible from which this was translated actually does not begin with the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And all biblical scholars and these guys that do these translations know this, and they should know this. So they should have busted this centuries ago, right? And they did not. So either someone is paying them or telling them not to bust this or not to reveal this. And Michael Ledwith discovers this because he realized that in the Hebrew Bible, it starts, opening phrase of the Bible starts with Ba, with the letter B, the second letter of the alphabet. Ba, Rashit, bara Elohim, et ha-shamayim wa et ha-iaretz, which is actually a grammatically nonsensical statement. And it refers to Elohim as a plural. And in this statement, it actually means the singular God, because that statement is translated as, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Well, that's not true. So when he inserted the first letter of the alphabet, which it should have, A or Aleph, it now says Abba, which means Father. So it's Abba Rashit bara Elohim et ha-shamayim wa et ha-iaretz, which is the Father of the beginnings created the Elohim, the heavens and the earth. And that changes everything. And that brings me to the three holy cows of our education. Humans evolved out of apes. Nothing can travel faster than the speed of light, and energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be converted from one form to another. The theory of evolution remains a theory. There is no real absolute evidence that we evolved out of apes, but that gets shoved down our throats. And if you have not seen Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed, please go and see that documentary. It's quite spectacular what they do to academics around the world just for mentioning the word creation or creative process. It's unbelievable. They destroy their lives. in the Middle Tennessee State University, 2005. A bunch of students propelled sound beyond the speed of light. This was published in the American Institute of Physics and then very, very quickly shelved because this is very dangerous information, especially for the youth. I'll explain to you how sound can travel beyond the speed of light because it's not the way we think about sound traveling in this medium. It's sound, and yet it is slightly, we need to first come to grips about the nature or with the nature of our reality, which I'm going to cover in this. So, and then finally we get told that we cannot create or destroy energy, and then in the next second they tell us we all come from the Big Bang. So, oh wow, that's cool. I thought we can't create or destroy energy, and now we suddenly come from the Big Bang. So you just see how they play, how they lie, and they constantly create these backdoor exits for when they get caught with a lie, and they have a backdoor exit. And in this case, they say, well, you see, that energy wasn't created out of nothing. It actually came from an infinitesimal small little point called a singularity. So they constantly make up these things, like the nucleus of an atom is impossible for the nucleus to exist because of the repulsive forces, because we can't figure out how the nucleus of the atom exists. So they come up with a BS thing for it. They say, well, it's the strong force. It's the strong force that holds the nucleus together. Oh, it's a strong force. Of course, that's how it works. So, well, we have no idea how it works. It shouldn't work. It shouldn't be there. But it's the strong force that holds it together. So the moment we give it a name, everybody goes, oh, that's great. Well, that's how it works. And that's how they bamboozle us. You see, theoretical maths and theoretical physics is the black magic of the new millennium. That's what it is. It's a really dangerous tool. And that's how they get away with a lot of this stuff. And that brings me to the space and cosmos, one of the greatest deceptions and one of my most passionate new areas of research is what is space and what is the cosmos? Because it seems to me that one of the greatest secrets that has been kept from us and yet given to us by NASA themselves for the last 3 or 4 decades, they constantly tell us that there's water everywhere in space. But that's not what we perceive, right? If I told you there's water in space everywhere, you'd say, well, you're an idiot. Space is a vacuum. We know space is a vacuum. There's nothing there. And yet that's not the case. And when you start researching space and water, it becomes mind-blowing. Article after article after article after press release and press release about water in space in amounts that are completely mind-blowing. Ocean worlds, water in the solar system and beyond. In 2009, NASA found a sprawling cloud of cold water vapor around a solar system at a nearby star. The water vapor could eventually deliver oceans to dry planets that are forming in the system. It's water vapor. It's not water in some weird thing. It's water vapor they're talking about here. Could eventually bring oceans to new planets forming. This is just a little disturbing. And just hold on to your faith. The famous Eye of God nebula actually weeping tears of water. Wow, so there's water coming out of this nebula. This is not just a solar system. This is a nebula. This is a place where galaxies are born. Stars and galaxies are born in a nebula. And water is coming out of this. Can you imagine the size of the water that's coming out of a nebula? It's like one drop of that will engulf our entire solar system. And it just goes on. You know, oceans detected inside Saturn's moon, and stars found shooting water bullets. NASA confirms best ever evidence water on Mars. Water from Orion. Now there's water coming out of the constellation of Orion. And this is a big one. Star found shooting water bullets. I mean, a star shooting water bullets. A star is supposed to be a sun. There's water on a star? I challenge you after this evening, go to the pub tomorrow, strike up a conversation with somebody and tell them, did you know that there's water on the sun? What do you think they're going to tell you? You're a freaking idiot. They don't have enough information. So we're getting to this point now that you can't have a discussion with somebody about any subject unless they have sufficient amount of information, because they'll constantly block you, tell you you're stupid, and so forth. So it's tricky, and we have to navigate this river of discussion and debate very gently and very carefully, because we're going to lose friends and families and break up partnerships because of new knowledge and information that some of us embrace and others discard as BS.